want you to have a bright future. Maybe some of you heard this from well-intentioned parents and educators growing up. Maybe some of you are being told this right now. Today, some parents and educators will guide their students to a bright future by taking them to the Occupational Information Network website, or ONET. It's a website sponsored by the Department of Labor, which outlines hundreds of job descriptions, as well as their potential for future growth. You can go to the rapid growth jobs list on the website and find alphabetically actuaries at the top and wind turbine technicians at the bottom. Those jobs with the greatest growth potential and the brightest futures have little sun icons next to them to help you out. It wouldn't be unreasonable for us to guide our students through this list and help them find the jobs with the greatest growth potential. This would be a very practical and efficient way of doing guidance counseling. And practicality and efficiency seem to be things we're pretty concerned with in education these days. And really, since about the Industrial Revolution in this country, we've increasingly made education more career-centric, more tangible, more practical. And in doing so, we've watered down the liberal arts. Remember that general education meant to expose us to a variety of disciplines, regardless of our primary area of interest, in order to help us be more critical thinkers and make more meaningful connections. That's been pushed aside in favor of something a bit more realistic. The problem, however, with realistic and practical skills training alone is it won't do us much good in a world where we're not staying in the same jobs for very long. Today, the average worker stays at his or her job for about 4 years. For the youngest of the workforce, it's half that. Yet despite these very obvious trends, the way we should be preparing young people for this life of job hopping, doesn't seem to be so obvious. And not all of us even agree that we should be preparing young people for a life of job hopping. I mean, it sounds kind of ridiculous. But clearly this is the future. And so what am I suggesting today? That we get rid of vocational and technical programs and replace them with a good old-fashioned liberal arts model? Well, if you'd asked me a year ago, I definitely would have said yes. You see, I've always been a fan of the liberal arts, but especially saw job hopping on the rise, I thought for sure this is the best way to educate young people today. Clearly, vocational education is far too restricting and stifling. This was before I took a research trip to Switzerland last summer, where I was surprised to find not only how popular vocational education programs are there, about 70% of young people will choose a vocational pathway over a traditional university pathway. But more surprising, 50% of young people who learn a vocation in Switzerland end up job hopping later in life. Even more surprising, 80% of young people who make a job shift are better off after doing so, typically making more money after making the shift, proving that this job hopping is intentional, it's voluntary, and that's important. We know that in economics, terminations are a bad thing, right? No one wants to get fired. But voluntary transitions, or quits, are actually signs of economic health. So, I was wrong. These findings busted all of my negative preconceived notions about vocational education. Clearly, these young people who'd learned a vocation were better prepared and better equipped to job hop later in life. However, these findings didn't totally change my mind about the liberal arts. You see, the success of the vocational education program in Switzerland is largely contingent on a strong, general foundation in the liberal arts. After all, how can you expect a young person, 14 years old in Switzerland, to choose his vocational pathway if he hasn't yet been exposed to a variety of disciplines? But furthermore, once a young person is on his vocational pathway in Switzerland, the curriculum is intentionally general and flexible enough to allow and even encourage later job hopping. So these findings affirmed that even with a strong, robust vocational education program like the one in Switzerland, you still need a general education to go along with it. You still need the liberal arts. You need both. This was an important discovery for me personally. Growing up, I always thought I had to pick one or the other. I could be practical and career-minded, or theoretical and abstract. Well, I ended up becoming a student of the humanities, and in college I was a German major. And I would often have what I now call utter doubt in the humanities. I would wonder, what am I doing? What is the point of all this abstract nonsense? I made a huge mistake. I would freak out, so I'd enroll in a business class to settle my mind. And then I would get bored and fall in love with the humanities all over again. And I would vacillate back and forth like this, thinking there was something seriously wrong with me. I now realize that that kind of exploration was such a huge part of my development. And if it hadn't been for my strong foundation in the liberal arts, this kind of exploration would not have been possible. And I'm very grateful for that. And I think it's kind of sad when I see so many of our at-risk students in this country being tracked into very finite and specific vocational and technical programs. I get the logic. Put the most at-risk students on what seems to be the path that will guarantee some kind of economic stability for these kids. I get it. The problem, though, with only exposing these kids to the practical and the tangible and the lucrative, and not the philosophical, the abstract, and the creative, is it's robbing them of an entire world of opportunities, and it's not guiding at all, it's tracking. And I would argue that it's these students precisely, these students on the fringes of society, who are most in need of a general, interdisciplinary liberal arts education. Because let's not forget, the liberal arts were originally meant to liberate us. So remember the ONET website I told you about earlier? Well, it took me some time to put the pieces together and to figure out why a handful of the at-risk students I was serving were coming up to me with surprising certainty for 16 and 17-year-olds, telling me they wanted to be actuaries. I know what you're thinking. I was thinking the same thing. One, I had to find out what an actuary was. Two, this is odd for a 16, 17-year-old to have such a definitive path in mind. And then finally, I remember thinking how simple it would be for an overworked, overburdened educator who truly wants the best for this student at risk of not graduating, this student at risk of not achieving his or her goals, to really want the best for this student. So to go to that ONET website and to find at the top of the alphabetical list, actuaries. So my message to educators today is this. With vocational education programs on the rise and more funding and attention going in that direction, remember that the young person you're working with today is likely going to want to or have to make a shift eventually. Are you giving him the tools to be able to do that well? Parents, how can you prepare your future job hoppers? Well, you can start by instilling that free agent, freelancer mentality. Encourage entrepreneurial thinking whenever your child does. You might try challenging your child to write his dream job description. Then challenge him to go find it, or better yet, create it if it doesn't exist yet. Please do not pressure your child to pick a career at 18. She's not going to have a career for the rest of her life. Employers, watch out, the job hoppers are coming. I know, it can seem scary hiring a young person these days. You're worried they're gonna leave in 6 months. But we are seeing a surge in freelancers in this country. So perhaps it's time to make that way of working work for your company. Try getting the most out of a project-based employee while you have her. Then let her go on her way. It'll be more conducive to the job hopper and maybe more conducive to your company. Students, get excited. The world has never been so wonderfully uncertain, and I promise this is a good thing. You are going to have to keep up with the fast-paced lifestyle, but you already know how to do that. Remember, you have the skills employers want and need, that fast work approach, the tech know-how, cultural understanding and empathy. But you are going to have to gain some more practical skills along the way. You should always be acquiring new skills. That's essential. These skills are your currency as you hop from job to job throughout your life. But remember, too, that as you go through life acquiring skills, to not forget your liberal arts education. If you want to be a successful job hopper well into the future, you're going to have enough of the generalist in you as well. It's time we stop arguing over whether or not we should prepare young people to live a life of job hopping and accept that we need to figure out the best way to do this. The liberal arts education is going to be so much more important in the future than it was for the one-track life of the industrial age. We've got to give this generation of pluralists the room they need to morph, grow, and reinvent themselves throughout their lives. We've got to give this generation the foundation they need to go out and create the very brightest of futures. Thank you.